Ginny Greiman is a professor at Met. She's an expert on megaprojects. She worked extensively on the Big Dig project. Those of you who live in Boston will have lived and died by the Big Dig project. She also apparently knows where all the bodies are buried, and I think that's real bodies as well, not just metaphorical bodies. So Ginny's been with us for 8 or 9 years now. She's carved out a real niche for herself as an expert in the megaproject arena. She wrote a really groundbreaking book 2 or 3 years ago, which has become the standard for megaprojects. She's involved in all sorts of consultancy, including working on the Crossrail project in London. She flies over to London seemingly every week, actually. Ginny spends more time on aeroplanes than anybody else I've ever met. She must have a gazillion air miles by now. But she's got herself up off her sick bed today virtually to share her expertise with us. So thank you very much, Ginny. Away you go.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Oh.
I can usually speak loud enough so everyone can hear me, but is this on? Hello?
The online students.
Yes, it's on now.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today. How many students do I have today? Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, I hope I'll teach you something brand new today, and thank you for coming, and thanks to all of you and those of you online around the world, wherever you may be, welcome to you also. My topic today is managing complexity, something I do a lot of. I do it all the time, and I'm going to take you through not only the Big Dig, but some of the other complex projects that I continue to work on throughout the world, and try to introduce you to a new concept in project management. And that is something that goes beyond what we typically think of when we think of project management, and that is the iron triangle. Now, I spent 9 years on the Big Dig as risk manager and as deputy general counsel, and I saw a lot of problems over those 9 years. And when projects end, it's always very sad. You're saying goodbye to friends you've had for many years, you've worked very closely with. Everyone's going off to a new project, and then you always have to pack up your boxes, and that's not fun, is it? And when I saw my boxes being packed and moved, and I knew they were going to some underground cave or some government basement and may never surface again, I thought, this isn't right. We need to share the lessons learned from projects. So about, I guess 5 years ago, 6 years ago, after coming to Boston University, I decided I was going to start a project, and that was going to be collecting the lessons learned from the Big Dig and beginning the process of understanding how did we manage that project, looking back. How did we manage all the complexities and all of the interactions among stakeholders? So I set out to write a book, and I spent almost every evening on it until very, very early in the morning, because that's how long it takes to write a book. It wasn't War and Peace, but I felt like it was. That took, 30 years? So mine's a little shorter, fortunately. I had maintained many good friends from the Big Dig and wanted to get their perceptions of it as well. So I interviewed people that I knew quite well, and I also interviewed people, believe it or not, that I had never met, which is difficult considering you're the risk manager. You get to meet almost everybody. And what I learned is we all had different perceptions of what we saw during those years and what we learned. And these perceptions I have now documented, and the book continues to evolve because over time you continue to learn more. Now, since I'm talking about complexity today, I want to begin with what is a simple project? Well, it's been defined by researchers, by Danish, Norwegian, MIT researchers, by stability, defined by stability and clear cause and effect relationships that are easily discernible by everyone. It follows a predictable path, such as the critical path, and a controllable path, and thus it's considered to be managed by the use of standardization and best practices. It's signified by the traditional iron triangle, or as some of you know it, as the triple constraint. Balancing scope against cost and time, or balancing time against cost and scope, or balancing cost against scope and time, considering we have many decisions to make along the way. Now, complexity takes on a whole new meaning, and I have seen it defined in so many different ways. We wouldn't have time today to go through all the definitions of a complex project, but you often see words like stakeholders, authenticity, ideas, competition, creativity, design, resources, innovation, interaction, integration. All of these words have meaning, and they're all important in terms of defining complexity. Since I have been working with this group of researchers now for over a year, I'm going to borrow their definition of a complex project as defined in a white paper published by the Project Management Institute last year. And they define a complex project as characterized by feedback loops and unforeseen emergent behavior. How many of you deal with surprises in your life each day? I bet you've all had a surprise. Yeah, I see the hands going up, probably in the last week. I don't know, I must lead a very complex life because I have a surprise in my life every day. Something emerges that I just didn't see coming, as much as I might plan. And sometimes these surprises can spiral out of control, but they're still fundamentally tractable by structured, if time-consuming and costly analysis. The researchers define this domain as knowable, encompassing both, and you may recall these terms from your experience in project management, encompassing both known unknowns and unknown unknowns. I would add one more category to that the researchers did not include, and that is an unknown known. And someday I hope to have an opportunity to talk to you about those because they occur too frequently and we haven't learned how to manage them well. Now, these researchers go on to define a third domain, and that's called the chaotic domain. And the chaotic domain, as distinct from the complex project domain, they define as unknowable. So today I'm going to focus on the complex domain rather than the chaotic, so that we can have a better understanding of project organizational conflict. Now, as you can see, there are feedback loops here. If I were to design this to encompass all the feedback loops in a major mega project, I probably have about 500 feedback loops. So I'm giving you a simplified view of complexity, beginning at the very top with the political realities of complexity. And Churchill reminds us that politics is a business, and because it's a business, it needs to be managed. So often when I advise on projects, I always hear the stakeholders saying, oh, the politics of this project. You just can't manage them. Yes, you can. But you have to understand them, and you have to be prepared for them, and you have to have contingency plans, because every project has political realities. Sometimes the political realities emanate from the top, sometimes from the bottom, and sometimes they come in sideways and blindside you. But we always have a shop floor. That's why we're all here today, because we're on that shop floor as project and program managers. That's what we do. We're the implementing people that hopefully bring the project or program to fruition. But we always have our stakeholders we have to do business with, and we always have our conflicts. We have our experts, our technical consultants. They know everything, don't they? I actually feel sorry for the experts, the engineers, the scientists, the designers on projects. I feel very sorry for them because they always get blamed for everything. And they're not always at fault, which is why I dedicated my book to the designers and engineers of the world. They have a very difficult job fighting with project and program managers. Sometimes they're one and the same, and that creates even more complexity, which I'll talk about later. So managing these tensions creates complexity. And the more tension you have, the more complexity you have. Projects that are complex have unique characteristics. Sometimes they're called megaprojects. Sometimes in Europe they use the term major projects. But these complex projects do have characteristics. They generally last a long time, and we don't like things that last a long time. We're very impatient. And to think we might not even live to see the end of our project. There are some engineers working on the high-speed rail now in California that are very upset. They may not make it another 15, 20 years to see the end of the project they're working on. The benefits of the project often go to the children and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren of those that worked on those great projects like the Panama Canal. They have dynamic organizational and governance structures, and I'll explain those in a moment. Multiple sponsors. Got a lot of people telling you what to do. They're highly regulated. There's a lot of public scrutiny and lots of policy making going on all the time. So as your policy changes, your project changes. Your stakeholders also have great needs. And they don't always know what their needs are when the project begins. Suddenly they realize it midstream. They really would like to see this happen, but they didn't tell you that in the beginning of the project, despite all the meetings you had to determine the interests and expectations of your stakeholders. You've got to manage also the interfaces between all these projects. On the Big Dig, we had thousands of projects. So between these projects, there were interfaces, sometimes on the critical path, sometimes off the critical path. Sometimes a new pathway was created. And all of a sudden, we discover a pathway we didn't even know existed. Lots of ambiguity and uncertainty, and complex methodologies and integrated processes. How many fighter pilots do we have in this room? I don't see any fighter pilots. How many members of the military or former members of the military? Good. I always see a few hands. Welcome and thank you for your service. I am now working on a major project involving systems engineering, a new book with co-authors, hopefully will be out the end of this year with the support of the Project Management Institute, so thank you to PMI. I am working on understanding how we react to emergent behaviors in projects. And one thing I've learned from the fighter pilots is that they have a concept called the OODA loop. OODA standing for observe, orient, decide, and act. So that you don't shoot down Black Hawk, right? How many of you seen Black Hawk Down? You know, decisions have to be made instantaneously. Well, in studying behaviors and in working with the researchers, I have learned that the OODA loop is very relevant to managing complexity. Except often we have a little more time than the fighter pilot does. So rather than observe, we have a little more time to probe. Rather than orient, we can sense our environment. Rather than decide, we have time to analyze. And rather than act immediately, we can develop responses. And how do we do this? We do this through what I've developed in my research, the 5 E's. Expert analysis. Complexity requires expertise, and lots of it, because often you're dealing with something that has never been done before. You also have to explore conflicting advice. Everybody's going to have a different opinion when you're doing something new. Environmental change is a huge factor. You have to learn in complex projects to deal with your changing environment. Not just the people, not just the processes, but the programs and the methodologies will change, as will the policy. You have to experiment in complexity. Things are not as simple as they may appear, and sometimes you have to try things out to see if they work. And of course, you have to create, I'm sure you're all familiar with Disney, Pixar's working environment of innovation. You have to employ methodologies that generate innovative solutions. Now, my former boss, Richard Kapka, who was the former Federal Highway Administrator, described working on a megaproject as agents of social transformation. He said the planning of a megaproject must be different if you really want to achieve success. Project leaders and the management team must do more than just manage a project. They must manage a public journey. Boston's Big Dig, as many of you know, had many, many unusual complexities that are still talked about around the world. And the Big Dig is often looked at as a model. It not only did things wrong, it did some things right. But you don't often hear about what it did right. Boston's Big Dig had 54 major designs, thousands of sub-designs, 132 major construction projects, thousands of sub-projects, major interchanges, new technology, the first and the widest landmark cable-stay bridge, jack tunnels. Jack tunnel technology was very new at the time of the Big Dig, as was slurry wall technology. We also invented mining technology during the course of building the Big Dig. We invented soil freezing and deep soil mixing. Many of the mixtures came from Japan. We looked to our partners overseas. Jet grouting. Jet grouting was done on a level that had never been done before in a project. And of course, excavation created all kinds of challenges. Now, we don't build mega projects just to employ people or just to give the politicians something to talk about. There's usually a reason. And for those of you that are younger, you have no idea what Boston was like back in the 1980s. Bumper-to-bumper traffic, no breakdown lanes, no passage to escape. You just sat there for about 2 hours, and those of you who have been to India know it gets pretty noisy in the congested traffic. Well, the horns were honking for 2 or 3 hours, some days at a time. And that was because in the 1950s, we built a viaduct above ground instead of going underground and building tunnels. Can anybody guess why? Money? No, it wasn't the money so much. It was more the politics. Oh, we had a pretty good politician back then. Water table, now we're talking. We didn't have the technology. That's right. We didn't understand the technology of building tunnels in inner cities. So Boston became an experiment. And remember, one of the factors in managing complexity I mentioned is experimentation. There is no question the Big Dig was an experiment. And experiments always cause controversy, don't they? Because people aren't sure whether it's a good experiment or a bad experiment because they haven't done it before. They don't have a lot of data to look at and compare and contrast. Data is wonderful if you have it. But we were really experimenting with building a city underwater, building tunneling under land and underwater. Now, we've been building tunnels underwater for centuries. We know how to do them. The fish are fairly quiet, they don't disturb us, and we can make a lot of headway. But when we're building underground, we got a lot of noisy neighbors, don't we? We've got tall buildings, we've got businesses, we have communities of people and residents living within this, I'll use the word chaotic situation. The Big Dig is known for its technological difficulties, but I want to make clear that it is not just technology that makes projects complex. In fact, as hard as the technology was, and as difficult as it was to determine costs and schedules because of the technology, there are other factors which we will look at that make projects very complex other than just technology. This is one of my favorite scenes because it shows the tunnel going above the MBTA red line. Can you imagine if you're moving a tunnel box in place and you have people on that red line? Wouldn't work. So all tunnel boxes were moved at midnight when the red line was shut down. We had lots of neighbors to complain. Gillette World headquarters warned us that if we shut off their water cooling system, we'd be fined about $300 million a day, and the price tag would go up the longer it was shut down. The Federal Reserve said, forget $1 million a day. It's going to cost $1 billion a day if you shut our utility lines and connections down. We didn't even know where the utility lines were coming from in the Federal Reserve building because nobody had mapped the utility system in Boston, which had existed since the Revolutionary War. Now, complexity is not just technology, but it's also organizational and governance structures. And in my book, I write a lot about all roads lead to governance. And I'll put in a little commercial here. I'm teaching a course this summer and this fall in project and program governance. And this is a course really about the complexity of governing large projects. PMI provides some guidance to us in their program management standard. They say, you manage programs different than projects. It's not the iron triangle we're concerned about, it's the strategy alignment. It's the benefits management. It's your life cycle, very different in a program than a project. It's your governance structure and it's your stakeholder engagement, 5 domains. I offer up one more. It's called integration management for complexity management, and these domains become increasingly important in managing complexity. Now, I don't know if you can see this diagram all the way in the back. It's quite complex. It's a simplistic view of the governance organization of the Big Dig. And I have several colors in there to show you the state employees in yellow. Of course, this only shows a small portion of the 5,000 employees, but the yellow are the state employees, the white are the private sector consultant, the blue is the federal government, the green is the responsible parties, and the red are what I call hybrid programs that are a combination of public and private sector development. These complex structures, as you can imagine, create additional complexity. So we need to manage these structures and design them, but also make sure they evolve with the changing needs and expectations of your stakeholder. very different than your typical hierarchical corporate structure, because you have decision making going in all different directions, quite often horizontally from the bottom up, because that's where the expertise lies, and quite a lot of decision making that has to be allocated and delegated according to expertise. So when you have multiple sponsors, as you often do in large-scale projects, you will have greater complexity. And you notice the yellow on the top left does not connect with the blue on the top right. So you essentially have two separate reporting structures. And I would often talk to a program manager and ask them why they were doing something, and they'd say, well, the federal government told me to do it. And I talk to someone else, and they'd say, well, the state government told me to do it. Or Bechtel Parson Brinkerhoff, our management consultant, told me to do it. So here you see some real live examples of a breakdown in governance, confusion over who has the authority and the responsibility. And I'll never forget one of our first, actually the head of the Massachusetts Turnpike Authority, when he was questions about decisions he would make, he would always say, have to do what my banker wants. And his banker, of course, was the federal government. Now, no matter where I go in the world, Crossrail is one project, but wherever I go, I see these complex governance structures. Once again, you see two reporting lines. On the very right, you see the Mayor of London, and on the very left, you see the Secretary of State. Moving on down, you see directors of project management and program managers. So you have a combination of project management, program management going on simultaneously for multiple projects and multiple programs within this new projectized organizational structure that is created to manage the complexity of what you are doing. Now, I like simplicity. So I do a lot of research now in cybersecurity governance, which is really a mega project. And in cybersecurity, we have turned on our head the governance structure. And you see on the left-hand side, the authority going from the trans-supernatural, which normally would be on the top, and the legitimacy coming from the bottom of the triangle to the top. And that is because in cybersecurity governance, although our authority remains certainly in the European Union at the very highest levels, but our legitimacy, our expertise is really bottom up. And this is true in all complex projects. It's just that we aren't always able to recognize it and to properly allocate the responsibility in the way it should be done, because we are so used to hierarchical organizational structures. Now, I can't talk about complexity without talking about the fact that complex projects are often thought of as being late, over budget, and having difficult time staying on schedule. I look at it very differently. And there was a recent article published by Jeffrey Pinto, one of the scholars in project management, that said we need to look at how projects are shaped. We can't just look at the numbers. Scholars love to look at quantitative analysis, but quantitative analysis only takes us so far. But what is behind the numbers? And in complex projects, I would answer Anthony Flint's question, a very well-posed question. Anthony Flint just spoke recently here to an urban renewal seminar at Boston University, very well known in his field. I would answer this question by saying, no, they're not as bad as they seem, because we don't understand them and they're not explained very well. They're not explained very well by our project and program management leaders, by our politicians, by our reporters, because in fairness, our reporters aren't getting the information they need. So when you see a project like the Big Dig, back in 1985, $2.5 billion budget, and ending in 2007 with a $14.8 billion final budget, that really doesn't give you a realistic picture. Why? Because there are lots of elephants in the room right from the beginning, the planning stages of these projects. And it would be nice if our leaders and our politicians would come out and say from the very beginning, you know, this is just phase one of this complex project. We've got 10 more phases to get through. So this number is going to change. We expect our governments and our politicians to know the exact dollar amount of projects, no matter how complex they are, no matter how experimental they are, no matter how many engineering changes are required throughout the life of a project, and the demands of our stakeholders are enormous. We expect the number to be always right. Well, in complex projects, it's not going to be right, and we need to explain why. Let me give you one example from the Big Dig, although I could give you 1,000. How many of you have been across the Zakim Bunker Hill Bridge? I see almost every hand go up. Isn't that a beautiful bridge? That's what the designer intended. But this bridge did not come about in an easy way. There were 26 designs before it. The last one was called the X scheme. Why X? How many letters in the alphabet? I think I've got that right. So we had 27 designs. Why? Because our master engineer, Fred Salvucci, a very dear friend, was trying to save money. God bless him. Here he was, an engineer, big design engineer trying to save money. Because he thought $20, $30 million would mean a lot. He had the right attitude. He was trained not only as an engineer, but as a project manager. But he didn't realize that that would be unacceptable to the stakeholders in this project. They were not going to look out from their businesses and their residences and look at a ugly 11-level girder steel bridge. No way that was going to happen. So when a new governor came in, because remember your governance structures are constantly evolving, the new governor, in about 1992, William Weld, after Governor Dukakis, decided to set up a bridge committee. But he decided to not limit it just to Boston or to the United States, but to invite bridge designers from all over the world. Thus, we wound up with a Swiss designer, Christian Men, who did a terrific job on this bridge because he wanted the bridge to reflect Boston, the education capital of the world. So when you drive across the bridge next time, I want you to feel like you're riding through the pages of an open book. That was his intent in designing a cable stay bridge. Did it cost more? Oh, you bet it cost more. $100 million more, a lot of money. But the stakeholders refused to accept the original design. So please understand, when projects are designed, complex projects, they're going to change many times. There are also major impacts on cost and schedule. And these impacts, I'm not going to have time to go into them today, but one of the key ones is the fact that stakeholder expectations change. Now I'm going to move on, since I have a short time left, to sustainability, and remind you that complex projects are not about just the triangle. I'm going to tell you something today that probably some faculty here would not like me to say, but projects do not have to be on time and schedule to be successful. but they do have to deliver the benefits you promised. And those benefits go well beyond just delivering a highway. People want more than a highway. They want social, political, institutional sustainability. They want access to high quality information. And they want an open system so they can understand what is being delivered. And you can see that on the Big Dig, we had many benefits above and beyond. We took care of our fish, our shellfish. We built them a home. We developed a utility corridor that was a state-of-the-art corridor. We had ventilation and air quality that was a model for the world's cities. And of course, we enhanced business, increased property values. Now, project complexity goes on around the world. There are many innovation megaprojects, one of which I've had the pleasure to work on in Taiwan. This innovation megaproject I spoke about when I was visiting Poland at their PMI conference 2 years ago. This is the Large Hadron Collider project at CERN to solve unsolved problems of physics. This is a complex megaproject, not just involving multiple stakeholders and multiple processes and procedures and multiple methodologies, but multiple cultures, multiple countries, multiple scientific theories. I'm now working on India's Smart City Initiative. Oh, they have great demands. They just don't want roads and bridges and tunnels, but they want schools and education centers and knowledge sharing and additional assets. California, oh my, how many of you are from California? Well, the cows are complaining right now. They filed several lawsuits. They don't like the idea that their green grass and their farmland is being taken away from them. So they have a long road ahead of them in terms of dealing with the complexity of a long-term project not to be completed till 2028. So I'm going to conclude with two thoughts. Am I okay time-wise? Very good. Program management stakeholders. Major part of what you do. It's why it's a major domain of program management. And if you're not dealing with your stakeholders, you're not going to succeed. You don't have to just identify them. You got to work with them. Those stakeholders that complained the most on the Big Dig, I found them a job. I always would find work for those who wanted to participate in the project. Always engage your stakeholders. They're going to come from everywhere. We had international journalists who became stakeholders. We had scientists from around the world who were interested in the project. We had regulatory agencies that came out of the woodwork. We had, of course, our local community and business residents. But you're continuing to identify stakeholders throughout the life of your project and program. I'm going to conclude with the fifth domain of complexity. This is the most important one. It's not talked about much. Integration. It's defined by PMI in the Program Management Standard and the Project Management Standard. It encourages collaboration, innovation, and alignment with strategic goals and efficient use of people and resources. It involves processes, people, integration, program methodologies. On the Big Dig, we were constantly thinking about integration. We integrated everything we could. We not only integrated our organizational structure so that multiple companies and multiple government agencies work together side by side, but we integrated our risk management program. We didn't have 5,000 risk management programs. We had one. So every day we knew what our risks were. Why? Because we had control over the entire risk cycle of all, sometimes 500 projects at a time. We also looked seriously into engineering and construction, safety and health issues, and loss control. We also integrated our auditing. I'm often asked, how do you audit these large projects? How do you control them? not only quality control, but quality assurance. How do you verify that the procedures that you're using are not only being implemented, but that they are the right procedures? So we combined and integrated our audit agencies. This was quite a challenge, having them work together for the first time in the history of the Commonwealth. We also use multiple methodologies. That's how you manage complexity. You don't just stand in the project management space and expect a complex project to go well. You're moving back and forth. One day I might be in the program management space. Another day I might be in the portfolio management space. Another day I might be working with the systems engineers. Another day I might be concerned about concurrent engineering. Agile, I know we have many fans of agile project management in the room, and improvisation. And I've invented a few new methodologies, and next time I'll talk to you about those. And right now, PMI, INCOSE, MIT, and Boston University is involved, and I've been involved for the past year in working on the integration of systems engineers and program managers. How many engineers do we have in the room? Okay, those people that just raised your hands as being an engineer, are you also a project and program manager? So you hold two jobs, don't you? Well, that can be a problem. Do you remember the Shuttle Challenger astronauts? I always show their faces rather than the flames. These were real people. And the evening before the launch, they were not present in the room. They were the major stakeholders in whether or not to launch. But NASA and Morton Thiokol, and this is all documented in their reports, their Presidential Commission reports, a decision had to be made between Morton Thiokol and NASA. And let's say Morton Thiokol had the engineering responsibilities, right? And NASA had the program management responsibilities. But NASA did something very unusual. 5:30 in the evening, the night before the launch, they said to the Morton Thiokol vice president, take off your engineering hat and put on your program management hat. I want you to look at the questions we're asking differently. In that one question, the Morton Thiokol Robert Lunn, vice president, made a very different decision than they had been making on the months and the days preceding. And because of the way the question was worded, the Morton Thiokol engineer had a different answer. But the answer was what NASA wanted. NASA really wanted to launch. So a decision was made to go. And we all know what happened after that. So consequently, integration is a key factor. And thanks to PMI, I know we have some representatives here today from PMI. We are now working on a documented guide. We expect to have it out by the end of this year, talking about how we integrate system engineering and program management. We need to talk to each other. We need to understand each other. We've learned a lot about managing complexity. I'd like to summarize a few thoughts. Megaprojects are for future generations. We must be patient. They're managed through domains: stakeholder engagement, governance, organizational alignment, benefits analysis, integration, and not just the iron triangle. They require greater integration due to the complex interrelationships with stakeholders and the citizens they serve. But remember, they can be transforming. You can do some great things with complexity. The final thought, and the most important thought, is the difficult takes a little time. The impossible is what takes a little longer. Fridtjof Nansen, Nobel Prize winner in 1922, reminds us every day of this. So I hope you'll take on the challenges, not be frightened by complexity, but embrace it, engage it, and learn from it, and share with us here at Boston University all the great things you've learned about managing complexity. Thank you so much.